What's up, everyone? Tony from the Cold Case Project, back again. And today, what I want to run with you over is all content shared in these videos is readily available in any Google search. Now, with that said, I take this content, have it rewritten, and upon rewriting it, put it in these videos to spread the word on the thousands and thousands of cold cases of men and women throughout the United States that are just forgotten, and I give this platform to them so their cases and their stories can be told. Now, in addition to that, if you look down below in the description, you're going to see some brand new t-shirt and coffee cup designs I've actually gotten from a couple of my subscribers who have over the years have been giving me some awesome fan art. So with that said, I'm offering a 20% discount code down below if you check that out, and splitting proceeds with them because they are awesome. Been watching me for quite some time, and I definitely think they deserve to be rewarded for some of the work they do on top of being full-time employees also. So once again, if you have any recommendations or any suggestions, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the video. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Peace.
Randa Jari's disappearance remains one of Michigan's most mysterious cases. It was February 11th, 2009, when Randa, a mother of one and a woman dealing with bipolar disorder, was last heard from. She lived in an apartment in Fenton, Michigan, located just a quarter-mile east of US 23, and was last known to speak to a family member at 11:30 p.m. During this brief conversation, she said she was going to bed, which seemed typical of her routine. What followed the next morning, however, would puzzle her family, authorities, and anyone who heard of her case. At around 8 a.m. the following day, February 12th, a ride service arrived at her apartment for a scheduled pickup. The service, however, left after Randa did not answer the door. When one of her relatives tried to call her at 8:30 a.m. and received no response, they became concerned and decided to visit her apartment in person. Upon arrival, they were immediately struck by the open front door and the eerie stillness inside. Nothing about the apartment indicated that Randa had simply left of her own volition. The bed appeared undisturbed, as though she hadn't slept in it, and her clothes for the day were neatly laid out as if she intended to wear them. Even more concerning, the coffee pot, which she used daily, was cold, suggesting it hadn't been used that morning. Yet, nothing was missing from the apartment. Her identification, her cigarettes, and even her coat were all still there. Randa, who was known to be a chain smoker and dependent on a constant supply of cigarettes, did not take even a single pack with her. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle, but the absence of any trace of Randa was enough to send alarm bells ringing. The investigation into her disappearance revealed several unsettling details. Randa, who suffered from bipolar disorder, was someone who kept very close contact with her family. She would call them multiple times a day, and they would check in on her frequently. This made her sudden disappearance all the more jarring. No one who knew her could believe she would simply disappear without a word. Even though she had medical issues requiring medication, she had always been able to manage her condition well, and she was in good spirits leading up to her disappearance. Randa did not have a cell phone or a vehicle, and she relied on public transportation or the kindness of others for rides. On the day before she went missing, she had been spotted panhandling at a local McDonald's, asking for money from patrons. The McDonald's staff had called the police, and an officer had driven Randa back to her apartment. The fact that she had no money or resources when she vanished added another layer of mystery to her case. The apartment complex where Randa lived had surveillance cameras, but these proved to be inconclusive. Video footage from the night of her disappearance failed to show Randa leaving the parking lot, even though she would have typically walked through that area every day. While one officer suggested that she might have walked too slowly to trigger the motion detectors, this was hardly a satisfying explanation. Additionally, A vehicle was recorded on the CCTV footage around 4:30 to 5 o'clock a.m. that morning, but the footage was too unclear to discern any useful details, including the vehicle's make, model, or license plate. The only lead that has come from the investigation was the testimony from a local dentist's office. An employee there reported that a man had been seen with Randa several times in the months prior to her disappearance. The man was described as being between 30 and 35 years old, clean-cut, and often impatient when waiting for her. He was frequently seen asking how much longer she would be. This man was not considered a suspect, but he was identified as a person of interest. Police were eager to speak with him, hoping he could provide information about Randa's whereabouts. But to date, he has never come forward. Despite an extensive search by authorities, volunteers, and the public, no evidence of Randa was found. Law enforcement has explored many theories, but none have led to concrete answers. Could someone have abducted her from her home? Was she possibly taken by someone she knew, someone familiar with her routines? Given the lack of evidence and Randa's complex medical and personal circumstances, it is difficult to say for sure. Authorities have labeled her case as one of missing and endangered, but it's unlikely she simply walked away on her own, especially considering her close relationships with her family and her dependence on them for daily support. Randa's family, especially her mother, has struggled with not knowing what happened to her. Her mother has legal guardianship over Randa's daughter, but the absence of answers has left a huge void in their lives. Randa's case remains unsolved, leaving the mystery of her disappearance unsolved for more than a decade. Despite the uncertainty, there is hope that someone, somewhere, knows something. If you have any information about the whereabouts of Randa Jari or know anything about what happened to her that February morning, you are urged to contact Finn Police at 810-629-5311 or submit an anonymous tip. Sandra Horwith's disappearance remains one of the most haunting and mysterious cases in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It all began on October 1st, 1973, when 33-year-old Sandra, a dedicated mother of three, was last seen putting her children to bed around 10 p.m. in the small home they shared in the 3,000 block of Brayburn Circle. At the time of her disappearance, Sandra had recently relocated to Ann Arbor from Pennsylvania with her daughters, Robin, Tammy, and Becky, after a divorce from her husband. Sandra worked as a clerical worker at the University of Michigan Hospital, a job she loved, and she was known to be a devoted and loving mother, always putting her daughter's needs first. Sandra's relationship with her ex-husband was one that involved shared custody of the children. Despite the breakup, the family maintained a sense of normalcy. The children spent weekends with their father, while during the week, Sandra was their anchor. On the evening of October 1st, Sandra and her daughters had just returned home from a shopping trip to the Sears store at Briarwood Mall. It was a routine evening. She got her daughters ready for bed and began preparing for the next day. However, just before 10 p.m., Sandra received a phone call from a male friend, a call that would mark the last known interaction she would have before vanishing without a trace. The following morning, Robin was the first to wake up. The house was eerily quiet, and there was no sign of Sandra. The children's initial search of the house yielded no clues. They called the University of Michigan Hospital, where Sandra worked, and learned that she hadn't shown up for work. Something was clearly wrong. Robin, still not understanding the full gravity of the situation, noticed that her mother's car was still parked in the driveway, further deepening the mystery. Despite the strange absence, Robin was instructed to go to school, leaving the situation to remain unresolved for several more hours. Around 10 a.m. on October 2nd, the babysitter arrived at the house to care for the children. Upon noticing that Sandra was missing, the babysitter made the decision to call the police. It was then that the investigation into Sandra's disappearance began in earnest. Authorities found the flower beds outside the home trampled, suggesting some form of disturbance had occurred. However, Sandra's car, purse, and watch were still at the house, while her checkbook and personal belongings were missing. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing about the scene immediately suggested a violent struggle. The only clue was that a neighbor reported hearing a strange noise coming from behind the property around 10:50 p.m., but no one went out to investigate, and the noise stopped shortly after. In the weeks that followed, police launched an extensive investigation, searching the area around Brayburn Circle and interviewing friends, family, neighbors, and coworkers. Sandra's ex-husband cooperated fully with the investigation, providing an alibi and submitting to polygraph tests. Authorities soon ruled him out as a suspect. However, there were no other leads, and the case quickly grew cold. As months passed, the Horwith family struggled to come to terms with Sandra's disappearance. The children were sent to live with their father in Rochester, Michigan. The heartbreak of not knowing what happened to their mother weighed heavily on them, but they held on to the hope that Sandra hadn't simply walked away from them. Robin, her oldest daughter, said, "Her parents always wanted us to know that she didn't just abandon us. She didn't just get up and leave. She loved us too much for that." Then, in 1975, a potential break in the case emerged. The name of Gary Addison Taylor, a notorious serial killer, surfaced. Taylor was a convicted murderer and rapist who had a history of violent attacks on women. He had been institutionalized in psychiatric hospitals multiple times and had a long history of escaping and committing violent crimes. Taylor had been living in Ann Arbor around the time Sandra vanished, and authorities later learned that he and Sandra had been acquainted, though the exact nature of their relationship remains unclear. Gary Taylor, also known as the Phantom Sniper or Royal Oak Sniper, had a notorious criminal past. In the late 1950s and 1960s, Taylor had been involved in several violent incidents, including attacking women with a hammer, threatening them with a butcher knife, and committing robberies. He had been diagnosed as insane and committed to psychiatric institutions, including Michigan's Ionia State Hospital. After his release, Taylor moved to Seattle, where he continued his violent behavior and eventually relocated to Houston. In 1973, Taylor committed another murder in Washington State and was subsequently arrested. However, due to lack of evidence, he was not convicted at that time. Taylor's violent spree continued, and in 1975, he was apprehended in Texas. During his subsequent imprisonment, Taylor confessed to murdering 4 women across 3 states, Michigan, Texas, and Washington. His admissions were chilling, and he described burying the bodies of his victims behind his former home in Onstead, Michigan, which was located only a short distance from Ann Arbor. Taylor's confessions were gruesome, but when investigators searched the Onstead property, they found the remains of 2 women who had been missing from Ohio. Despite Taylor's chilling admissions, Sandra's body was not found among the remains. Authorities questioned Taylor about Sandra's disappearance, and he admitted to knowing her but denied having killed her. Though he was a known serial killer with a violent history, there was never any physical evidence linking him directly to Sandra's case. Gary Taylor's connection to Sandra Horwith remains a dark chapter in the investigation. Sandra's daughter Robin has always believed that Taylor was involved in her mother's disappearance. Despite repeated search efforts, including excavations at Taylor's Onstead home in 2019, no new evidence was found to explain Sandra's fate. The Ann Arbor Police Department has kept Sandra's case open, and Taylor remains a person of interest. Even though many years have passed, the Horwith family still seeks closure. In 2022, police reached out to Gary Taylor again for an interview about Sandra's case, but he refused to cooperate. Taylor, now in his late 80s, remains incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary for other murders, but his silence in Sandra's case only deepens the mystery. Sandra's daughters have not given up hope. They continue to keep her memory alive, speaking about her frequently and keeping photographs of her in their homes. "We talk about her all the time," Robin said. "My dad always says she looked exactly like Ava Gardner, thick brown, beautiful hair, beautiful smile. We didn't let this define us. We live our life in her memory. She would want us to be happy." The case remains open, and authorities continue to search for answers. The truth about what happened to Sandra Horwith on that fateful October night remains elusive, but the hope for closure persists. The Ann Arbor Police Department and the FBI continue to investigate, and anyone with information is urged to come forward. Sandra Horwith was last seen wearing a white blazer, blue stretch pants, a house dress, or a blue tank top with a pullover shirt, beige strapped wooden sandals, and carrying a purse. She is described as a 33-year-old woman, 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighing 135 pounds, with long brown hair and brown eyes. Her daughters, particularly Robin, remain determined to find out what happened to their mother and to bring closure to a case that has haunted them for decades. If you have any information regarding Sandra's disappearance, you are encouraged to contact the Ann Arbor Police Department at 734-794-6920 or the FBI at 313-965-2323. The case of Kayla Hunter, Christian Justice, and their mother Alicia Marie Fox is both heartbreaking and perplexing. On May 24, 2014, Alicia, Kayla, and Christian went missing from their home in Detroit, Michigan. They had been living with Alicia's husband, Aaron Maurice Justice, who was also Christian's father, in the 1800 block of Ardmore Street. The family had recently moved out, which may have been a sign of discord, though no one knew at the time just how ominous the disappearance would turn out to be. Kayla and Christian's disappearance, along with Alicia, was first noticed when Alicia failed to attend Kayla's kindergarten graduation. This uncharacteristic absence led to concern among family members, who, by June 6th, reported them as missing. Authorities were initially unclear on the details of their disappearance, though a text message that supposedly came from Alicia on June 3rd was the first sign that something might have happened. However, investigators later determined that Alicia likely did not send the message, deepening the mystery. On June 9th, 2014, Alicia's decomposed body was discovered in a vacant house on Penrod Street on Detroit's west side. She had been shot twice in the head and wrapped in a blanket, and the house where her body was found was just a few doors down from the home of Aaron's cousin. The brutal murder was an ominous clue to what had transpired. However, there was no sign of either Kayla or Christian, and they would remain missing. The investigation into the murders of Alicia and the whereabouts of her children quickly turned to Alicia's husband, Aaron Maurice Justice. On June 11th, 2014, Aaron was arrested in Atlanta, Georgia, and charged with first-degree murder in connection with Alicia's death. Evidence quickly mounted against him. Authorities discovered that after Alicia's murder, Aaron rented a U-Haul and drove it 300 miles within Detroit between May 27th and May 29th, never leaving the city. Afterward, he boarded a plane to Atlanta, Georgia. In a further effort to conceal the crime, Aaron sold Alicia's Chevrolet Impala to a junkyard in Taylor, Michigan. By the time authorities found the vehicle, it had already been stripped. Aaron's history of violence, coupled with his criminal background for drugs and weapons offenses, added to his suspicious behavior. In addition to the murder charge, Aaron faced multiple other accusations. He had been involved in several incidents of violence against women, making him a prime suspect in Alicia's death. As authorities dug deeper, they found a bullet hole in the wall and blood stains on the ceiling of the upstairs bedroom in the Ardmore Street residence. These discoveries suggested Alicia was murdered in the home. Further investigation revealed that Aaron's childhood friend, Timothy Bernard Jones, had also been involved. Jones was charged with evidence tampering, concealing a death, and being an accessory to murder after the fact. Jones admitted to helping Aaron hide Alicia's body, first storing it in the crawl space of their home before moving it to the vacant house on Penrod Street. Jones claimed that the children, Kayla and Christian, were alive when they helped Aaron dispose of Alicia's body. But as of yet, there has been no sign of either child. A major clue in the case came when Aaron and Alicia's white pit bull was found on June 19, 2014, running loose in Detroit. The dog showed signs of abuse, with strangulation marks around its neck and burns from cigarettes on its face and chest. The dog had been very protective of Kayla and Christian, and authorities speculated that Aaron may have sold it for dog fighting or breeding. The pit bull was taken in for veterinary treatment and eventually placed in a foster home. In September 2015, Aaron Maurice Justice reached a plea deal with the prosecution. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and a felony weapons charge. Aaron was sentenced to 45 to 80 years in prison for his role in Alicia's death, but this was cold comfort for the family members of Alicia and the missing children. Aaron's arrest and conviction did not bring closure to the case of Kayla and Christian, who remained unaccounted for. The children's whereabouts are still unknown, and authorities believe they may be in grave danger. They suspect the children could be somewhere in the Atlanta area where Aaron was arrested. The disappearance of Kayla and Christian remains one of the most tragic and unresolved elements of this case. Kayla, just a young girl at the time, and Christian were last seen with their mother and the man they trusted. Their disappearance, along with Alicia's murder, raises questions about what transpired during those critical days in late May and early June 2014. If anyone has any information about the whereabouts of Kayla or Christian, or if they have seen anything that could provide answers to their disappearance, they are urged to come forward. Every lead, no matter how small, is vital to solving this case and bringing the children home. Heather Kelly, a devoted mother of 8, was last seen on the night of December 10, 2022. The 35-year-old from Kalamazoo, Michigan, had told her children she was visiting her boyfriend in downtown Kalamazoo. That evening, Kelly and her boyfriend, Carlos Vance Watts Jr., were reportedly at the Park Club of Kalamazoo, an upscale private dining club where Watts worked. At 10:20 p.m., Kelly made a phone call to her children, assuring them she would be home soon. But she never arrived and was never heard from again. The following day, Kelly's truck was discovered abandoned on East Michigan Avenue near Sprinkle Road in Comstock Township, Michigan. The vehicle had been set on fire, and investigators noted a small hole in the driver's window. Inside the truck, authorities found clear indications of violence, a significant amount of Kelly's blood and long human hair. The gruesome discovery suggested foul play. Nearby, in a field about half a mile away, investigators found additional evidence: women's underwear, a pair of jeans, boots, and a do-rag, all later linked to Kelly through DNA analysis. As authorities worked to unravel the mystery, they turned their attention to Watts at the time of Kelly's disappearance. He was residing at a halfway house operated by the Kalamazoo Probation Enhancement Program. Watts had been placed there following his release from federal prison, where he had served time for a 2010 drug conviction that also involved a murder-for-hire plot. Watts quickly became a prime suspect. Investigators discovered that his cell phone had been turned off the night Kelly vanished. The next day, he suspiciously requested a new phone number. More alarming was the account from his halfway house roommate, who recalled that on the night Kelly disappeared, Watts had deep scratches on his chest and back. On December 12th, just 2 days after Kelly's disappearance, authorities questioned Watts about her whereabouts. Shortly after the interrogation, Watts cut off his ankle monitor and fled the halfway house. The manhunt for him did not last long. He was captured on December 14th and subsequently charged with felony escape. Watts attempted to justify his flight by claiming he had left due to threats from Kelly's brother and that he feared for his safety. Despite his efforts to argue his case, he later pleaded guilty to the escape charge in 2023. However, he subsequently attempted to withdraw the guilty plea, further muddying the waters of the case. As the investigation pressed on, authorities gathered more evidence linking Watts to Kelly's presumed murder. His DNA was found alongside Kelly's on the do-rag recovered from the field near her abandoned truck. This crucial piece of evidence further solidified authorities' belief that Watts was responsible for her disappearance and death. In January 2024, Watts was officially charged with open murder in connection to Kelly's disappearance. Authorities assert that he killed her just hours before escaping from the halfway house. While he remains behind bars, Kelly's body has yet to be recovered, leaving her loved ones with lingering questions and unresolved grief. As the case moves through the judicial system, the hope remains that more answers will emerge, providing closure to Kelly's family and ensuring justice is fully served. The disappearance of Glenn Hustin is a case that has left the small community of Middleton, Michigan, and his family searching for answers for over 2 decades. Glenn, a 34-year-old man, was last seen on the evening of February 5, 2001, at his residence on the 100 block of North Caroline Street. His disappearance would set off a series of events that continue to baffle investigators, family, and friends. Glenn had lived a relatively quiet life in Middleton, a small town in Gresham County, Michigan. He worked at the Fulton Country Corners gas station, a place where he was well known by the locals. Glenn was described as a friendly, social person, always willing to help those in need. He was especially close to his coworkers, and it was a coworker who would become the last person to see him before his sudden and unexplained disappearance. On the evening of February 5th, Glenn had ridden his bicycle to work, as he often did. However, on this particular day, Glenn decided to leave his bike at the gas station. A female coworker, who had been working the same shift, offered to give him a ride home. She dropped him off at his apartment later that evening, and this would be the last confirmed sighting of Glenn Hustin. The following day, February 6, 2001, Glenn failed to show up for work. This was extremely out of character for him. He was known to be a reliable employee and someone who took his work seriously. His absence raised immediate concerns among his coworkers and family. They tried to reach him, but when they were unable to make contact, they began to worry that something was seriously wrong. Glenn's apartment was checked by family and friends, and it was discovered to be completely intact. There were no signs of a struggle or any evidence of foul play. However, there was something odd found inside: his clean laundry, neatly folded and sitting by the door. This detail added to the growing mystery. Why would someone leave their apartment in a hurry, but leave behind their laundry, a seemingly mundane and harmless item, behind? 2 weeks after Glenn's disappearance, a key clue was discovered. Glenn's bicycle, a Blue Girls model with a wire basket on the front, was found abandoned next to a trucking company warehouse in Ithaca, Michigan. Ithaca is about a 20-minute drive from Middleton, and while it was unusual for Glenn to be in that area, there was no sign of him at the scene. The discovery of the bike seemed to suggest that Glenn had been there recently, but there were still no clues as to where he had gone or what had happened to him. The mystery deepened as authorities began to investigate further into Glenn's life. It was soon revealed that Glenn had been slated to testify as a witness in a criminal trial just 1 week after his disappearance. The trial was taking place in Gresham County, Michigan, and Glenn had allegedly witnessed his landlord and employer, Roger Eugene Brown, commit serious crimes. Glenn had seen Brown steal a rifle and a bow from another tenant's apartment, and he had also witnessed Brown assault a child inside his own apartment. Roger Eugene Brown was well known in the community, and his criminal activity had raised concerns for some time. Glenn was set to testify against him in a larceny trial, where Brown faced charges for the theft of the rifle and bow. The assault charge was also significant, and prosecutors were eager to have Glenn's testimony in court. However, after Glenn's disappearance, the case was thrown into disarray. The larceny charge against Brown was dismissed, as Glenn was the only eyewitness to the crime, and without him, there was no way to proceed with the case. The dismissal was a devastating blow to the prosecution, as Brown could have faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted. However, Brown was still charged and pleaded guilty to the assault of the child in question. He was fined for his actions, but it was clear that the case against him was no longer the same without Glenn's testimony. Over the years, there have been suspicions that Glenn's disappearance may have been connected to his role as a witness in Brown's criminal trial. Could Brown or someone else involved in the case have played a role in Glenn's vanishing? While there has been no concrete evidence to suggest foul play on Brown's part, the timing of Glenn's disappearance is suspicious, and it has left many to wonder if he was silenced to prevent his testimony from coming to light. In the years following Glenn's disappearance, his sister, Kathy, tried to investigate what had happened to her brother. She felt a deep sense of responsibility to uncover the truth, but her efforts were met with resistance and hostility. Kathy reported that during her investigation, she began to feel like she was being followed. On several occasions, she received threatening phone calls, and at one point, an unknown person smashed the windows of her car. The intimidation tactics only escalated, and eventually, Kathy was forced to abandon her search for answers, frustrated and scared by the lack of progress. Despite the lack of new leads, Kathy continues to hold out hope that someone, somewhere, knows something about Glenn's fate. The case remains unsolved, and the questions surrounding his disappearance continue to haunt his family. Since Glenn vanished, there has been no activity on his Social Security number, no attempts to cash any of his government assistance checks or income tax refunds, and no movement in his bank accounts. These facts suggest that Glenn has not been alive, or at least has not been in control of his finances, since his disappearance. Glenn's family believes that he is likely dead, though they continue to hold onto the hope that someday they will receive answers. His sister remains particularly disturbed by the lack of closure in the case. "I just can't believe it," she said. "Glenn was a good person. He didn't deserve to disappear like this. Someone knows what happened to him." Glenn Hustin was a kind, social person who loved his job, enjoyed helping others, and was known for his love of country music and the television show The Dukes of Hazzard. He had been planning to move out of his apartment before his disappearance, and he had 3 pet cats that he adored. His family has never given up on the hope that someone will come forward with information that will lead to answers about what happened to him. As of today, Glenn's case remains open, and the police are still actively seeking information. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance, particularly his role as a witness in a high-stakes criminal trial, continue to cast suspicion on those who may have been involved in the case. Anyone with information about Glenn Hustin's disappearance is encouraged to contact the Michigan State Police or the Gresham County Sheriff's Department. Janet Kirkup was last seen in Jackson, Michigan, during the summer of 1992. That summer, she and her husband, Robert Kirkup, embarked on a road trip in their recreational vehicle, an attempt to escape the pressures and failures that had defined the previous years of their marriage. They had 3 daughters, Shauna, Sherry, and Susan. By that time, Shauna and Sherry were adults and had moved away, while 16-year-old Susan remained with her parents. Robert had spent much of his career in senior management before making a drastic life change in 1989. Hoping to become his own boss, he purchased a saloon, but the venture failed. By the fall of 1991, the Kirkup's house in Apple Valley, California, had been repossessed, leaving them without a permanent home. They made the decision to travel the country in their RV, stopping along the way to visit relatives. Susan initially joined them for 5 months, but eventually decided to leave, opting to live with her sister Shauna instead. Throughout the journey, Janet kept in touch with her daughters through letters and phone calls. However, after visiting Robert's relatives in Genesee County, Michigan, the communication suddenly ceased. Her daughters noticed that when they called Robert, he would dismissively tell them that Janet was unavailable. Their mother, once so present in their lives despite her troubles, had seemingly vanished without a trace. In January 1993, Robert finally addressed Janet's absence in a 6-page letter to their daughters. He claimed that Janet had left him for another man, a wealthy individual who also owned an RV. According to Robert, the last time he saw her was when he dropped her off at an airport hotel in Buffalo, New York. However, his story lacked key details, and, as time went on, his vague explanations raised further suspicions. At first, the Kirkup's daughters wanted to believe their father. They knew Janet had been unhappy and that their parents frequently argued. Susan, who had lived with them in the RV for several months, recalled their heated fights, fueled by drinking. She described Robert as a controlling and abusive figure, particularly when intoxicated, but Shauna had a different perspective. She remembered their mother as the volatile one, materialistic and prone to occasional physical outbursts toward her children. Given Janet's dissatisfaction with their financial struggles, it wasn't entirely implausible that she had sought a wealthier life elsewhere. However, as the years passed and no sign of Janet emerged, their skepticism grew. Eventually, Sherry filed a missing person report, and police launched an investigation into Janet's disappearance. Authorities found no trace of her after the summer of 1992, no paper trail, no sightings, and, most damningly, no record of the mysterious man Robert claimed she had left him for. Investigators began to suspect that Janet had met with foul play. By 1999, law enforcement had tracked Robert down in Michigan. When questioned, he stuck to his story about Janet leaving him, but added an unexpected statement. "I had nothing to do with her death." The comment, unsolicited and oddly specific, only heightened investigators' suspicions. When pressed further, Robert refused to speak and demanded a lawyer. With a search warrant, authorities combed through Robert's RV, discovering a 1992 calendar where he had meticulously recorded each stop, noting destinations, miles traveled, and gas mileage. Only 2 dates, August 16th and 17th, were left blank. These missing entries stood out as glaring inconsistencies in an otherwise precise record. Determined to get answers, authorities turned to Shauna, who agreed to confront her father. When she did, Robert finally broke down and confessed. He claimed that on August 14th, 1992, while they were at a campground near Buffalo, Janet had attacked him with a knife during an argument. In what he insisted was self-defense, he strangled her to death. He then buried her body in a wooded area, but could not recall the exact location. Despite his claims of self-defense, Robert was charged with Janet's murder and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. However, his confession left many unanswered questions, and without Janet's remains, the full truth remained elusive. To this day, her body has never been found, and her daughters are left with lingering doubts about what really happened on that fateful trip. Though Robert paid for his crime, the mystery of Janet Kirkup's final resting place remains unresolved. Her disappearance is still classified as a case of foul play. On the night of September 15th, 1979, 12-year-old Kimberly King spent the evening at a friend's house in Warren, Michigan. The residence was located directly across the street from her grandparents' home, where she frequently stayed. Though it was supposed to be an ordinary sleepover, Kimberly made a fateful decision that night, one that would ultimately lead to her unexplained disappearance and a decades-long mystery. At approximately 11 p.m., Kimberly called her older sister from a payphone, stating that she had sneaked out of her friend's home. She did not specify why she had left or where exactly she was calling from, only that it was within a short walking distance of her grandparents' house. Her sister, concerned about her safety, instructed her to return to her friend's home immediately. But Kimberly never did. She was never seen or heard from again. The location of the payphone Kimberly used remains uncertain. While she indicated that it was nearby, one witness later claimed to have seen her using a payphone several miles away. This discrepancy complicated early efforts to trace her movements that night. Initially, authorities considered the possibility that Kimberly had run away. One of her sisters had a history of running away multiple times, and though Kimberly herself was known to stay out late on occasion, she had never previously left home for extended periods. As time passed without any signs of her whereabouts, law enforcement grew skeptical of the runaway theory. Her case was eventually reclassified as a non-family abduction, with foul play strongly suspected. One of the earliest and most disturbing theories was that Kimberly had fallen victim to the Oakland County child killer, an unidentified predator responsible for the abductions and murders of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, in Oakland County, Michigan between 1976 and 1977. The killer, dubbed the babysitter, was known for holding victims captive for several days, grooming them, and even bathing and feeding them before ultimately killing them. Unlike Kimberly, however, all the known victims were found shortly after their murders, their bodies left in visible locations near roadways. In contrast, Kimberly's body has never been recovered, leading some investigators to question whether her disappearance was truly linked to the same perpetrator. One possible suspect in Kimberly's case was David Norberg, a man who lived just 2 streets away from her home in Warren at the time of her disappearance. Norberg had a troubling reputation. And after his death in a car accident in Wyoming in 1981, jewelry believed to belong to the Oakland County child killer's victims was discovered among his possessions. However, no conclusive evidence ever linked him to the crimes. His body was exhumed in 1999 so that his DNA could be compared to a strand of hair found on Timothy King, the last known victim of the Oakland County serial killer. The results, revealed in 2002, showed that the hair did not belong to Norberg, though investigators still considered him a potential suspect in Kimberly's case. More than 3 decades after Kimberly vanished, another suspect emerged. Arthur Ream, a convicted child rapist and murderer. Ream was sentenced to life in prison for the 1986 murder of Cindy Zarzicki, a 13-year-old girl he lured under the pretense of celebrating his son's birthday. In 2008, after years of denying involvement, Ream finally led authorities to Cindy's remains, which he had buried in a shallow grave 30 miles from Detroit. While incarcerated, Ream allegedly bragged to his cellmates that he was responsible for the murders of multiple young girls, possibly 4 to 6 victims. In May 2018, investigators began digging at the same site where Cindy had been found, believing that Kimberly King and other missing girls, Cynthia Kuhn, Kim Laro, Nadine Odell, and Kelly Brownlee, might also be buried there. However, despite extensive excavation efforts, no additional human remains were discovered, and the search was called off after a week. Ream continued to deny involvement in Kimberly's case up until his death from cancer in prison in August 2024. Kimberly's disappearance left an indelible mark on her family. Her grandmother, who passed away in 1995, held on to hope that Kimberly would one day be found. She even purchased a cemetery plot for her granddaughter, a tragic symbol of her enduring grief. Meanwhile, Kimberly's 2 surviving sisters have never stopped searching for answers, clinging to the possibility that one day, the truth about what happened to her will come to light. More than 4 decades later, Kimberly King remains missing, her case unsolved. Whether she fell victim to a known serial predator or an unknown perpetrator, the circumstances of her disappearance continue to haunt investigators and those who knew her. Until concrete evidence emerges, the mystery of what happened to Kimberly King remains one of Michigan's most unsettling cold cases.